she fed a lonely old man every day until the Mafia boss entered with 4 men and called him father, revealing a secret that no one in the restaurant was ready to hear. Wait, before we start, tell us your city below, then sit back, enjoy the story, and remember to subscribe for more great stories. The moment Don Vittorio Castellano entered Bella Notte, Chicago's finest Italian restaurant, conversations hushed like a theater before curtain rise. 4 men flanked him, each wearing identical black suits with subtle bulges beneath their jackets. At 33, Vittorio commanded respect that men twice his age struggled to achieve. His tailored Brioni suit and Patek Philippe watch silently announced wealth that exceeded most people's annual salaries. He hadn't planned on coming here tonight. Business at the family's social club had run late. Disputes about territory in the West Side needed resolution, and Vittorio's word was final. But a cryptic text from his consigliere, Marco, had changed everything. Your father's been spotted. 7 years had passed since Antonio Castellano, former head of the Castellano crime family, had vanished without explanation. Most assumed he was dead, either by rival hands or by his own family's decision. Neither assumption was correct, but Vittorio never bothered correcting rumors. In his world, misinformation was often more valuable than truth. The maitre d' nearly tripped rushing to greet him. Don Castellano, what an honor! Your usual private room? Vittorio ignored him, dark eyes scanning the restaurant until they locked on a corner table. There sat an elderly man, his once imposing frame now diminished by age, white hair neatly combed back. What caught Vittorio's attention wasn't his father's unexpected appearance after all these years. It was the young woman sitting across from him, carefully cutting his veal into bite-sized pieces. Who is she? Vittorio asked, not taking his eyes off the scene. His underboss, Salvatore, followed his gaze. Just a waitress, boss. Name's Emma Pierce. Been working here about 6 months. No criminal connections we know of. Vittorio observed how the woman smiled genuinely at his father, how she patiently waited as the old man struggled to lift his fork. There was no fear in her interaction, no forced politeness, just authentic kindness. In Vittorio's world, such a thing was rarer than diamonds. The old man's been coming in 3 times weekly for 2 months, Salvatore continued. Always asks for her section. She spends her breaks sitting with him, feeding him when his hands shake too badly. Something cold twisted in Vittorio's chest. His father, the man who had ordered countless rivals permanently removed, who had built the Castellano Empire through blood and fear, was now dependent on the kindness of a waitress who knew nothing of his true identity. Vittorio moved forward, his men forming a protective formation around him. As he approached the table, he caught fragments of their conversation. You remind me of my daughter, the old man was saying, his once commanding voice now raspy with age. She had the same kind eyes. The woman, Emma, smiled as she wiped a bit of sauce from his chin. I'm sure she's beautiful then, she joked, earning a wheezing laugh from Antonio. She would have been. Cancer took her when she was just 12. Emma's face softened with genuine sympathy. I'm so sorry, Antonio. Vittorio stopped a few feet from the table, and that's when his father looked up. Despite the years, Antonio Castellano's eyes still held the sharp intelligence that had made him legendary. Those eyes widened in recognition, then narrowed with something Vittorio couldn't identify. The restaurant had gone silent, every patron sensing the dramatic tension unfolding. Emma looked up, confused by the sudden change in atmosphere, and her eyes met Vittorio's. She was younger than he initially thought, perhaps 25, with clear eyes that held no recognition of who he was. Her honey-brown hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, her makeup minimal. Hello, father, he said, his deep voice carrying across the silent restaurant. Emma's eyes widened, darting between the elderly man and the imposing figure before her. Antonio's hands trembled more violently now, but he managed a nod. "Vittorio," he acknowledged. "I wondered when you'd find me." Vittorio slid into the booth beside the old man, while his men positioned themselves strategically around the table. Emma started to stand, clearly intending to give them privacy, but Vittorio's hand shot out, catching her wrist, not roughly, but with enough authority to freeze her in place. "Stay," he commanded, then softened his tone. "Please." Emma slowly sank back into her seat, her eyes never leaving his. Vittorio was accustomed to people averting their gaze in his presence, out of respect, out of fear. Her direct stare was both refreshing and unsettling. "You've been caring for my father," Vittorio stated, studying her reaction. "Antonio is a regular customer who needs assistance," she replied carefully. "I didn't know he was your father." "And if you had?" Vittorio challenged, leaning forward slightly. Emma's chin lifted. "I would have done exactly the same." A smile tugged at the corner of Vittorio's mouth. Either this woman had no idea who the Castellanos were, unlikely in Chicago, or she possessed courage that bordered on recklessness. "Emma brings me cannoli," Antonio interjected, his voice stronger now. "The kind with the pistachios, like your mother used to make." Vittorio's expression didn't change, but something inside him shifted. His father remembered his mother's cannoli, a detail so mundane, so human. It seemed out of place, coming from a man who had ordered enemies buried beneath the foundations of Chicago's skyscrapers. "I see," Vittorio replied, turning back to Emma. "And what else have you and my father discussed during your meals together?" "The weather," Emma answered without hesitation. "His arthritis, my nursing studies, how the Bears are guaranteed to disappoint this season." Her gaze was steady. "Just conversations, Mr. Castellano. Nothing more." "Don," Salvatore corrected from behind Vittorio's shoulder. "You address him as Don Castellano." Emma's brow furrowed. "I apologize if I've offended," she said, though her tone suggested she wasn't particularly concerned. "I didn't realize formalities were required when discussing football teams." To everyone's surprise, Vittorio laughed, a genuine sound that startled even his own men. "You're studying nursing?" Vittorio asked, waving away Salvatore's attempt to interject again. "Final year," Emma confirmed. "I work here nights to pay for it." Antonio's hand reached across the table, covering Emma's. "She'll be an excellent nurse. Has the right temperament, compassionate but not soft." Vittorio observed the casual contact between them, the easy familiarity. 7 years his father had been gone, and here he was, forming a bond with a random waitress, while his own son had been left to navigate the treacherous waters of Chicago's underworld alone. "My father appears to have grown quite fond of you," Vittorio noted, his voice neutral though his mind raced with calculations. Emma withdrew her hand from Antonio's, sensing the undercurrent of tension. "He's a kind man who enjoys company, that's all." Vittorio's eyebrow raised slightly. "Kind isn't the adjective most would choose for Antonio Castellano." "Perhaps they don't know him as I do," Emma replied, then immediately pressed her lips together as if regretting the implication. "Perhaps," Vittorio agreed, his voice dangerously soft. He turned to his father. 7 years without a word, and I find you being spoon-fed by a nursing student." Antonio's gaze was unflinching. "There are things you don't understand, Vittorio." "Enlighten me." "Not here." Antonio's eyes flicked meaningfully toward Emma. Vittorio nodded, making a decision. He turned to Salvatore. "Clear the restaurant." Within minutes, the maitre d' was apologetically ushering diners out, offering complimentary meals for another evening. "You can go too," Vittorio told Emma, his tone gentler than before. She looked at Antonio, concern evident in her expression. "Will you be all right?" The old man nodded. "This is family business, Cara. Nothing to worry about." Emma stood, hesitating. "Your regular time on Thursday?" she asked Antonio. Before the old man could answer, Vittorio interjected. I'll be bringing my father personally from now on. His eyes held hers. But perhaps you could still join us. He seems to enjoy your company. Emma studied him, clearly trying to read beyond his words. I work Thursdays anyway, she finally said with a small shrug. As she turned to leave, Vittorio's voice stopped her. Emma. She looked back, waiting. How much do you know about my family? He asked directly. She hesitated, and Vittorio could see the internal debate playing across her expressive face. I know enough to understand why the restaurant emptied so quickly, she finally answered. I know your family name carries significant weight in Chicago. She paused. And I know Antonio never mentioned having a son until today. The last statement struck like a physical blow, though Vittorio's expression remained impassive. Now you've met me, he replied smoothly. I look forward to our next conversation. Emma nodded once before walking away, her back straight, her steps unhurried despite the palpable tension surrounding her. When she disappeared through the kitchen doors, Vittorio turned to his father, all pretense of civility vanishing. 7 years, he repeated, his voice a low growl. The Donati family nearly destroyed everything you built. The Romanos tried to take our territory piece by piece. And where were you? Antonio's rheumy eyes held a shadow of his former power. There are things happening that go beyond family business, my son. Forces moving against us that required my strategic absence. Strategic absence, Vittorio echoed with bitter amusement. Is that what we're calling abandonment now? Antonio's gnarled hand shot out with surprising speed, gripping Vittorio's wrist with unexpected strength. Watch your tone. I may be old, but I'm still your father. For a tense moment, father and son stared at each other, decades of complicated history stretching between them. Why her? He asked, nodding toward the kitchen where Emma had disappeared. Of all the people in Chicago, why reveal yourself to a waitress? A ghost of a smile touched Antonio's lips. She reminded me of your mother. Not in appearance, but in spirit. Unafraid, genuine. He released Vittorio's wrist. And I needed someone without connections to our world, someone whose kindness wasn't calculated. Outside the restaurant windows, lightning flashed across the Chicago skyline, illuminating the gathering storm clouds. The Donati family has been asking questions about you, Vittorio said quietly. Rumors are circulating that you're still alive. Your reappearance won't go unnoticed, not for long. I'm counting on it, Antonio replied, his voice suddenly stronger, more reminiscent of the man who had once controlled Chicago's underworld with an iron fist. It's time to end this charade. What charade, father? What have you been planning these 7 years? Antonio's eyes drifted toward the kitchen doors where Emma had disappeared. She's in danger now, you know, just by association. Vittorio followed his father's gaze, something protective stirring within him. I'll have men watch her apartment. Not your usual men, Antonio cautioned. Someone discreet. The Donatis have eyes everywhere, and if they discover my connection to her... Vittorio nodded grimly. I understand. He signaled to Salvatore. Arrange for my father's transportation to the estate. Maximum security. As his underboss stepped away, Vittorio looked back at his father, studying the old man's face, the deep lines, the cloudy eyes, the trembling hands that had once signed orders that changed the landscape of Chicago's criminal world. The girl, Antonio said suddenly. Promise me you'll protect her, Vittorio. She's innocent in all this. Vittorio thought of Emma's direct gaze, her unflinching manner in the face of his power. No one is truly innocent, father. But yes, I'll ensure her safety. A dark smile touched his lips. Besides, I'm curious about the woman who earned Antonio Castellano's trust when his own son couldn't. 3 days after the encounter at Bella Notte, Emma received a text message from an unknown number. Car will collect you at 7 p.m. Thursday. VC. Emma stared at the message. a chill running down her spine. How had he gotten her number? Of course, Vittorio Castellano would have ways of obtaining such information. The question was why he was texting her directly, rather than having one of his men do it. She should refuse. She should block the number and request different shifts at the restaurant. She should pretend that night never happened. Instead, she found herself typing, "I can drive myself. I know the way to my workplace." The response came seconds later. "This isn't a request." Emma's fingers hovered over her phone. The nursing student in her recognized the warning signs of a controlling personality. The woman who had spent weeks caring for Antonio saw something different, a son protective of his recently reunited father. "I finish class at 6. Need to change before dinner." "7:30 works better," she replied, surprising herself with her boldness. 3 dots appeared, disappeared, then reappeared before the next message arrived. "7:30, be ready." Emma set down her phone, unsure whether she'd just established a healthy boundary or made a terrible mistake. Probably both. By Thursday evening, she was applying a final touch of lip gloss when her doorbell rang. Through the peephole, she saw a man in a black suit standing in the hallway, his posture rigid and alert. "Miss Pierce?" he said when she opened the door. "I'm Carlo. Don Castellano sent me to escort you." Outside her building, a black Lincoln Continental with tinted windows waited at the curb. Carlo opened the rear door, and Emma slid into the leather interior, half expecting to find Vittorio inside. Instead, she was alone in the back seat. "Is Mr. Castellano meeting us at the restaurant?" she asked as Carlo started the engine. "Don Castellano," Carlo corrected automatically, "is handling business matters first. He'll join you and the Signor Don later." Emma noted the formality with which these men addressed their employer. It wasn't just respect, it was reverence tinged with fear. The drive to Bella Nota took less than 20 minutes. Carlo led her through a private entrance into an exclusive dining room she knew was reserved for the restaurant's most important clients. Antonio Castellano was already seated at the table, looking more alert than she had seen him before. His white hair was freshly cut, his suit clearly expensive despite its dated style. When he saw Emma, a genuine smile brightened his features. "Emma, Cara," he greeted her, attempting to stand. "Please don't get up," she said, moving quickly to his side and leaning down to kiss his cheek, a gesture that had become habit over their weeks of meals together. "You look beautiful," Antonio said, patting the chair beside him. "Sit, sit." Emma complied, noticing 2 bodyguards positioned discreetly by the door. "You're looking well, Antonio. Better than Monday." The old man nodded. "Having my son back in my life has been invigorating." "Why didn't you tell me about him?" Emma asked directly. Antonio's expression grew solemn. "There are complications in my family that are better left undiscussed, for your safety as much as anything." "My safety?" Emma repeated skeptically. "Because your son is." "A businessman with many interests," came a deep voice from the doorway. Emma turned to see Vittorio entering the room, his commanding presence immediately altering the atmosphere. He wore another impeccable suit, this one charcoal gray with a black shirt open at the collar, revealing a thin gold chain. His dark hair was perfectly styled, his jaw clean shaven except for a precisely maintained shadow. "Miss Pierce," he acknowledged with a slight nod, taking the seat opposite her. "I trust Carlo made the journey comfortable." "Your car is very nice," she replied neutrally, "though I still maintain I could have driven myself." A ghost of a smile touched Vittorio's lips. "And deprive Carlo of the pleasure of your company? That would be cruel." A waiter appeared with a bottle of wine, pouring for each of them after Vittorio's approval. "You've been caring for my father for some time," Vittorio began once the waiter had left. "Tell me how that arrangement came to be." Emma glanced at Antonio, who nodded encouragingly. "It wasn't an arrangement, really. Antonio started coming in regularly about 2 months ago. He struggled with the menu, with cutting his food. I helped. It became a routine. Vittorio's dark eyes studied her, and at no point did he mention his family name, his connections. No, Emma answered truthfully. He told me stories about Italy, about his late wife, about his childhood. Nothing about business or family except... She hesitated. Except? Vittorio prompted. He mentioned losing a daughter to cancer. That's all. Something flickered across Vittorio's face. Surprise, perhaps, or confusion. He looked at his father. You spoke of Sofia? Antonio nodded, his eyes suddenly moist. Emma reminds me of her. Not in appearance, but in spirit. An uncomfortable silence fell, and Emma sensed she had inadvertently stepped into territory even Vittorio found unsettling. She changed the subject. How is your arthritis today, Antonio? You're holding your fork better. The old man's expression brightened. Much improved. Vittorio has arranged for a specialist from Switzerland to consult on my case. Emma raised her eyebrows, impressed despite herself. That's thorough. My father deserves the best care, Vittorio stated simply. And yet he was alone until recently, Emma observed before she could stop herself. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. The bodyguards by the door shifted uncomfortably, and Antonio's eyes widened in alarm. Vittorio, however, merely regarded her with increased interest. You speak your mind, he noted, swirling the wine in his glass. Most people find it healthier to guard their tongues in my presence. I'm not most people, Emma replied, maintaining eye contact. And in my profession, speaking directly can mean the difference between life and death. To her surprise, Vittorio laughed, a genuine sound that transformed his face, making him appear younger, almost approachable. Indeed you're not, Miss Pierce. Indeed you're not. The waiter returned to take their orders. Antonio requested his usual veal, while Vittorio ordered for both himself and Emma without consulting her. The risotto al nero di sepia is exceptional here, he explained, noticing her frown. Unless you'd prefer something else? The challenge in his tone was unmistakable. Emma recognized the power play for what it was. Actually, I would, she said calmly. Turning to the waiter, she smiled. I'll have the pappardelle with wild mushrooms, please. The waiter looked uncertainly between her and Vittorio, who after a moment nodded his permission. As the waiter hurried away, Vittorio's eyes remained on Emma, assessing. You continue to surprise me, Miss Pierce. Emma, she corrected. If we're having dinner together, you might as well use my first name. Very well, Emma, he agreed, her name sounding different in his mouth, somehow more significant. And you may call me Vittorio. Not Don Castellano, she asked with a hint of sarcasm. That title is reserved for business associates and subordinates, he replied. You are neither. What am I then? Vittorio considered her question, taking a deliberate sip of his wine before answering. At present you are a curiosity. A woman who showed kindness to my father without knowledge of who he was or what he could offer in return. Such behavior is uncommon in my experience. Perhaps you're associating with the wrong people, Emma suggested. Antonio chuckled, reaching over to pat her hand affectionately. I told you, Vittorio, she has fire. Halfway through the meal, one of Vittorio's men approached, leaning down to whisper something in his ear. Vittorio's face hardened instantly, all traces of warmth vanishing. Excuse me, he said, standing. A matter requires my attention. Please, continue your meal. He strode from the room, his men following in his wake. As soon as they were alone, Emma turned to Antonio. What am I doing here, Antonio? She asked quietly. Really? The old man set down his fork with a shaking hand. My son is protective. He wanted to assess your character himself. Why? I'm just a waitress who helped you cut your food. Antonio's rheumy eyes held unexpected clarity. In my family's world, Emma, there are no coincidences, no random acts of kindness without ulterior motive. Vittorio needed to determine if you were placed in my path deliberately. Placed in your... Emma broke off, understanding dawning. He thinks I was, what? Spying on you. For whom? We have many enemies, Antonio said simply. Some have waited years for the opportunity to strike at the heart of our family. Emma set down her fork, appetite gone. This is insane. I'm a nursing student who works in a restaurant to pay tuition. I'm not involved in whatever this is. But you are now, came Vittorio's voice as he re-entered the room, his expression grim, whether by choice or circumstance. He resumed his seat, eyes fixed on Emma with new intensity. Tell me, when did you last speak with Salvatore Donati? The name meant nothing to her. Who? Salvatore Donati, Vittorio repeated. Head of the Donati family, our primary rivals in Chicago for 3 generations. I've never heard that name before in my life, Emma insisted. Vittorio studied her face carefully. A man matching Donati's description dined at this restaurant last week. Requested your section specifically. Left you a substantial tip. Emma thought back, then shook her head. I don't remember anyone like that. Older gentleman, gray hair, designer glasses, Italian accent. Ordered the osso buco. Recognition flickered. That was Tuesday. Table 7. He said he was visiting from Rome, asked about Chicago landmarks. She frowned. How do you know what tables I serve? Vittorio ignored her question. What did you tell him? About landmarks? The usual tourist spots, Millennium Park, the Art Institute, Navy Pier. And about my father? Did you mention the elderly man you'd been caring for? Emma's indignation flared. Of course not. I don't discuss other customers. She pushed her plate away. Is that why I'm here? You think I'm somehow involved with your business rivals? You were an unknown variable, Vittorio stated coolly. In my position, unknown variables must be evaluated. I'm a person, not a variable, Emma snapped, rising from her chair. And I don't appreciate being manipulated or interrogated over dinner. Antonio reached for her hand. Emma, please. My son is only being cautious. She looked between father and son, one frail and pleading, the other powerful and calculating. I should go. Sit down, Vittorio commanded, his voice low but carrying undeniable authority. Emma remained standing, chin raised defiantly. I'm not one of your employees, Vittorio. You don't give me orders. For a tense moment, the air between them crackled with unspoken challenge. The bodyguards by the door shifted nervously, clearly unaccustomed to anyone defying their boss. Then, to everyone's surprise, Vittorio inclined his head slightly. You're right, he acknowledged. Please sit, I owe you an explanation. The unexpected concession caught Emma off guard. Slowly, she lowered herself back into her chair. Salvatore Donati dining in your section was not coincidence, Vittorio continued, his tone more measured. The day before, my sources informed me that my father had been located. The Donatis were watching him, and by extension, you. Emma's heart rate accelerated. Why would they care about me? Because you're connected to him, Vittorio nodded toward his father. And in our world, connections are leverage. A chill ran down Emma's spine as the implications became clear. You're saying I'm in danger because I helped an old man cut his veal? Antonio reached across the table, his weathered hand covering hers. I'm sorry, Cara. I never intended this. Vittorio's dark eyes held hers. The Donati family has been searching for my father for years. Now they've found him, and they've identified you as someone important to him. So what now? Emma asked, her voice barely above a whisper. What am I supposed to do? Vittorio leaned forward, his expression intense. For the immediate future, you continue as normal, with one exception. My men will be watching your apartment, your school, your routes between them. You'll notice them if you look, but they'll be discreet. 3 days after the dinner at Bella Notte, Emma found herself walking to her morning clinical rotation at Chicago Memorial Hospital, with the distinct feeling of being watched. Not the vague paranoia that might afflict anyone after learning they'd become a target in a mafia power struggle, but the concrete awareness of eyes tracking her movements. Vittorio had been true to his word. His men were discreet but omnipresent. Sometimes she spotted them, the same black sedan parked across from her apartment building, the broad-shouldered man reading a newspaper in the hospital cafeteria, the nondescript figure always 3 people behind her in line at her regular coffee shop. Strangely, their presence had become almost comforting. If the Donati family truly meant her harm, at least she wasn't facing the threat alone. Her phone chimed with a text message from the now familiar VC number. "Dinner tonight, 8 p.m. Car will collect you." Emma had learned that Vittorio's messages were always brief, always to the point, and always phrased as statements rather than questions. Still, in the days since their confrontation, she had maintained her small rebellions against his authoritarian tendencies. "Clinical rotation ends at 7. Need to shower and change. 8:30 works better," she replied. The response came seconds later. 8:15, don't be late." Emma smiled despite herself. This had become their routine. His demand, her counteroffer, his compromise that still asserted his control. A negotiation dance that should have irritated her but instead created a strange intimacy between them. She tucked her phone away as she entered the hospital, nodding to the security guard who had become yet another familiar face in her rotation. Halfway to the elevators, she spotted Dr. Harrison, the neurologist she'd consulted, hypothetically of course, about symptoms matching Antonio's condition. "Miss Pierce," he greeted her. "Have you considered my recommendation for your family friend?" Emma nodded. "I've discussed it with his son. They're consulting specialists." Dr. Harrison raised an eyebrow. "Good. With early intervention, the progression can be significantly slowed." He hesitated. "You mentioned his family has resources. Certain experimental treatments in Switzerland have shown promise, though they're not yet approved here." "I'll pass that along," Emma said, making a mental note to research these treatments before her dinner with Vittorio. The day passed in a blur of patient assessments, medication administrations, and charting. By 7:45, freshly showered and dressed in a simple blue wrap dress, Emma was waiting in her apartment when her phone chimed again. Car outside. She grabbed her purse and a light jacket, locking her apartment door behind her. The same black Lincoln waited at the curb, but this time when the rear door opened, Vittorio himself sat inside. "This is a surprise," Emma said, sliding into the leather seat beside him. "I expected Carlo." Vittorio wore another impeccable suit, this one navy blue with a subtle pattern. His cologne a complex blend of spice and wood that filled the confined space between them. "I had business nearby," he explained. "It seemed efficient to collect you myself." Emma doubted that efficiency was his only motivation, but she didn't press the point. "How's Antonio today?" "Asking for you," Vittorio replied, his dark eyes studying her with that same intensity she was beginning to recognize as his default state. His tremors were worse this morning. "Did you speak with Dr. Harrison?" "About the Swiss treatments." Vittorio's eyebrow raised slightly. "You've been making inquiries." "That's our agreement," Emma reminded him. "I help with Antonio's care." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Indeed it is. Yes, I've spoken with Harrison and 3 other specialists. The treatment protocol begins next week." Emma nodded, satisfied but uncertain what else to say. Being alone with Vittorio in the close confines of the car created a tension she hadn't anticipated. To her relief, he broke the silence. "Tell me about yourself, Emma Pierce." She glanced at him, surprised by the personal inquiry. "What do you want to know?" "Everything," he answered simply. "But we'll start with the basics. Family, background, how you came to be studying nursing in Chicago." Emma hesitated. Over the past few days, she had learned much about the Castellano family, not from Vittorio or Antonio directly, but from careful research online. The Castellanos had controlled much of the city's illicit activities for decades, their influence extending into legitimate businesses, politics, and law enforcement. Vittorio had taken control 7 years ago when his father disappeared, consolidating power ruthlessly according to newspaper archives. "My parents died when I was 19, she began, deciding that selective truth was better than lies he could easily disprove. Car accident in Michigan, where I grew up. I was already in my first year at University of Chicago. I stayed, worked multiple jobs to pay tuition, switched to nursing when I realized it offered better employment prospects." Vittorio listened attentively, his expression revealing nothing. "Siblings?" "None. There's an aunt in Seattle I speak with on holidays, but we're not close." "So you're alone," he observed. The blunt assessment stung, though it was accurate. "I have friends, classmates, co-workers, but no one who would burn the world down if you disappeared," Vittorio clarified. "No one whose absence would hollow you out from the inside." The specific imagery caught Emma off guard. That's a vivid way to describe loss. Vittorio's gaze turned to the window, his profile sharp against the passing city lights. "My mother died when I was 12. My sister Sophia followed a year later. Cancer, as my father told you." Emma remained silent, sensing this rare personal disclosure shouldn't be interrupted. "I watched it happen," he continued, his voice lower now. "Watched my father, the most powerful man in Chicago, brought to his knees by an enemy he couldn't threaten or bribe or eliminate." His jaw tightened. "And then, 7 years ago, he physically disappeared as well." "I'm sorry," Emma said quietly, "for all of it." Vittorio turned back to her, his expression once again unreadable. "Your sympathy is unnecessary. I'm merely establishing context." Emma recognized the retreat behind his walls and changed the subject. "Where are we going tonight? Bella Notte again?" "No," Vittorio replied. "My father wished to dine at home. He finds restaurant outings increasingly taxing." The car turned onto Lakeshore Drive, heading north toward the wealthy suburbs where Emma had always known intellectually that the Castellanos must live, though she had never imagined visiting their home. Home meaning the family estate, Vittorio confirmed. "It's more secure, and the medical facilities there are better equipped for his needs." The car turned off the main road, following a private drive bordered by ancient oak trees. Security cameras were visible at regular intervals, and Emma glimpsed men patrolling the perimeter with the unmistakable vigilance of trained guards. When the house came into view, she couldn't suppress a small gasp. House was inadequate. Mansion barely covered it. The Castellano estate was a sprawling Italian-style villa that looked like it had been transported directly from the Tuscan countryside, with its warm stone exterior, red-tiled roof, and perfectly manicured grounds. "It's been in the family for 3 generations, Vittorio explained as the car pulled up to the main entrance. "My grandfather built it to remind him of home." A uniformed staff member opened Emma's door. Vittorio emerged from the opposite side, buttoning his suit jacket with a practiced motion. "Welcome to Villa Castellano," he said, offering his arm with unexpected formality. Emma hesitated before placing her hand lightly on his forearm, acutely aware of the solid muscle beneath the expensive fabric. Together they ascended the wide stone steps to massive wooden doors that opened automatically at their approach. The interior was even more impressive than the exterior. Soaring ceilings, marble floors, priceless artwork, and antique furniture that Emma was certain belonged in museums rather than private homes. Yet despite its grandeur, there was a warmth to the space that surprised her. "Emma!" Antonio's voice called from an adjoining room. "Is that my favorite nurse arriving at last?" They found him seated in what appeared to be a library, surrounded by leather-bound books and illuminated by a crackling fire despite the mild evening. He looked frailer than Emma remembered, his complexion paler, but his eyes brightened at the sight of her. "You're looking well, Antonio," she said, crossing to kiss his cheek. "Liar," he replied with affection, but a kind one. Sit, sit. Tell me about your studies. For the next hour, conversation flowed easily between the three of them. Antonio was clearly delighted to have Emma in his home, proudly pointing out family heirlooms and telling stories of his childhood in Italy. Vittorio said little, but watched their interaction closely. When dinner was announced, a staff member helped Antonio to his feet, and Emma noticed how heavily he leaned on his walking cane. "May I?" she asked, offering her arm for additional support. Antonio smiled gratefully, transferring some of his weight to her as they made their slow way to the dining room. Behind them, Emma felt Vittorio's eyes on her back, assessing her caretaking of his father. Throughout dinner, Emma continued to notice small changes in Antonio's condition. The increased difficulty he had holding his utensils, the slight slurring of certain words when he grew tired, the tremor in his left hand that he tried to hide beneath the table. "You should be taking levodopa," she said during a pause in conversation, combined with carbidopa to manage the side effects. Both men looked at her with surprise, though for different reasons. "You've diagnosed me, little one?" Antonio asked with a wry smile. "I've observed symptoms consistent with Parkinson's," Emma replied carefully. "Your doctors will confirm, I'm sure." Vittorio's eyes narrowed slightly. "They have. The prescription begins tomorrow." "Good," Emma said, meeting his gaze directly. "The sooner treatment starts, the better the long-term prognosis." Antonio reached across the table to pat her hand. "You see, Vittorio, I told you she was special, smart as well as kind." After dinner, Antonio suggested they move to the terrace for dessert. As the old man made his slow progress toward the French doors with a staff member's assistance, Vittorio indicated with a subtle gesture that Emma should remain behind. When they were alone, he leaned forward slightly, his voice low. "You care for him." It wasn't a question, but Emma answered anyway. "Yes, I do." "Why?" Vittorio pressed. "You know who he is now, what he's done, what our family represents." Emma considered her words carefully. "I see the man, not the legacy. The human being who needs help with his fork, who lights up when talking about his late wife." She paused. "The father who still grieves his daughter and the years lost with his son." Something flickered in Vittorio's dark eyes before being quickly masked. "My father abandoned our family business at a critical moment, left me to face our enemies alone with no explanation, no guidance. And yet," Emma observed quietly, "you've moved heaven and earth to protect him since his return." Vittorio's jaw tightened. "He is still my father." "Family above all," Emma said, remembering a phrase Antonio had repeated often during their meals together. "Precisely." Vittorio studied her face, his expression softening almost imperceptibly. "You understand more than you should, Emma Pierce." Before she could respond, his phone chimed with a message. The change in his demeanor was immediate, all traces of openness vanishing as he read the text. He stood abruptly. "Stay with my father," he instructed, his tone brooking no argument. "Don't leave the house under any circumstances." "What's happening?" Emma asked, rising as well. Vittorio was already moving toward the door, signaling to security personnel who materialized as if from thin air. "Business," he answered curtly, then paused, turning back to her with unexpected gentleness. "He enjoys cannoli with pistachios. Make sure the kitchen serves them with dessert." With that, he was gone, leaving Emma alone in the massive dining room, the echo of his footsteps fading down the marble hallway. Emma made her way to the terrace, where Antonio was already settled on a comfortable chaise, a light blanket over his legs despite the mild evening. "My son has urgent matters to attend?" he asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. Emma nodded, taking the seat beside him. "He mentioned cannoli with pistachios for dessert." Antonio's face brightened. He remembered. "Good boy." His expression grew more serious. "You must forgive Vittorio his abruptness, Emma. He carries heavy burdens." The family business, Emma said carefully. Antonio's eyes, briefly clear and sharp as they sometimes became, when emotion overcame his physical deterioration, fixed on her face. Not just business, responsibility, protection, for our people, our territory. He reached for her hand. And now for you. A chill ran through Emma despite the warm evening. I don't need protection, Antonio. I'm not part of this world. The old man's laugh held no humor. You became part the moment I sat at your table, Kara. The moment my son looked at you the way he does. Emma felt heat rise to her cheeks. And how is that? Like a man seeing water after crossing a desert, Antonio replied simply. Like a man who has forgotten there are beautiful things in this ugly world. The meeting of the 5 families concluded well past midnight. Emma, exhausted by the tension and gravity of the evening, had retired to her room hours earlier, leaving Vittorio to finalize the details of what would undoubtedly be a coordinated assault against the Donati Empire. Sleep eluded her as she imagined what was transpiring across Chicago. Men moving through the shadows, lives being altered or ended, all because of decisions made in that ornate dining room. When she finally drifted off, her dreams were fragmented, filled with black roses and spray-painted doors. She awoke to urgent voices in the hallway. The bedside clock read 5:17 a.m. Emma slipped on a robe and cracked her door open to find the villa in controlled chaos. Security personnel rushing through the corridors, Salvatore barking orders into a phone, staff members moving with unusual urgency. "What's happening?" she asked a passing security guard. The man hesitated, clearly uncertain whether he should share information with her. "There's been an incident, Miss Pierce. Don Castellano requested you remain in your room." Before she could press further, Vittorio appeared at the end of the hallway, his shirt sleeve torn, a dark smudge that might have been blood or dirt on his jawline. When he saw her, his pace quickened. "You should be resting," he said, his voice rough with exhaustion. "What happened?" Emma demanded, noting the tension in his shoulders, the barely controlled fury in his eyes. "Are you hurt?" "Not mine," he said, glancing down at what she now confirmed was blood on his cuff. The Donatis were more resourceful than anticipated. Emma pulled him into her room away from the eyes of the staff and security personnel. In the privacy of her suite, she gestured towards the small sofa. "Sit, let me look at you." To her surprise, Vittorio complied, sinking onto the sofa with uncharacteristic heaviness. Up close, she could see the toll the night had taken. The shadows beneath his eyes darker, a small cut above his right eyebrow, his customary immaculate appearance disheveled. "The Donatis had inside information," he explained as Emma wet a cloth in the bathroom and returned to clean the cut. "They knew our movements, our timelines. Someone betrayed us." Emma's hand distilled. "One of your men?" "Someone close." Vittorio's jaw tightened. "We lost 3 soldiers, good men." Emma resumed cleaning the wound, professional instincts taking over. "I'm sorry. Salvatore was hit, not critically. He's downstairs with our doctor." Vittorio caught her wrist as she applied antiseptic to the cut. "They tried to reach the villa, Emma. While the main action was downtown, a separate team targeted this property." A chill ran through her. "Antonio is safe," Vittorio assured her. "But it was too close. They breached the outer perimeter before we detected them." The implication settled over Emma like ice water. While she had been sleeping, men had attempted to infiltrate the estate, men who would have shown no mercy had they succeeded. "Who?" she asked quietly. "Who betrayed you?" Vittorio's dark eyes met hers, cold with a fury she had never seen in them before. "My father's consigliere, Marco. He's been feeding information to the Donatis for months, perhaps years." "Marco?" Emma recalled the older man who stood behind Antonio at the 5 families meeting, his calculating eyes assessing her. But why would he? "Money, power, revenge." Vittorio's hand tightened around hers, though not painfully. It doesn't matter. He won't be doing it again. The finality in his tone required no elaboration. Marco had met whatever fate awaited traitors in the Castellano organization. The Donatis? Wounded but not destroyed, Vittorio admitted. Salvatore Donati himself wasn't at any of the locations we targeted. He's gone underground. Emma set aside the first aid supplies, her mind processing the implications. What happens now? We regroup, strengthen our defenses, find Donati before he can rebuild his operation. Vittorio stood, moving to the window to look out at the dawning day. And you remain here, under maximum protection. For how long? Emma asked, though she already knew the answer. Vittorio turned to face her, his expression softening slightly. Until I can guarantee your safety beyond these walls. They stood in silence, the gulf between their worlds never more apparent than in this moment. Emma, the nursing student whose greatest concern a week ago had been her upcoming exams. Vittorio, the crime lord who had just directed a coordinated attack against a rival organization. Yet something bridged that gulf, something inexplicable but undeniable. A connection that had formed rapidly but ran surprisingly deep. You should rest, Emma said, professional concern overriding personal confusion. When was the last time you slept? A ghost of a smile touched Vittorio's lips. Are you mothering me, Emma Pierce? I'm assessing you as a healthcare professional, she corrected, though a faint blush colored her cheeks. And you're exhibiting clear signs of exhaustion. Vittorio stepped closer, close enough that she could smell the faint traces of his cologne beneath the less pleasant odors of the night's activities. I have responsibilities that can't wait. My father needs to be briefed. Security protocols must be revised. Families of our fallen men must be notified and provided for. Emma recognized the weight of leadership in his eyes, the burden of responsibility for the lives under his protection. At least let me check that cut again in a few hours. It might need stitches. Vittorio nodded, his hand rising to touch her cheek with unexpected gentleness. You continue to surprise me, Emma. Most women would be hysterical after learning assassins nearly breached their bedroom door. Yet here you are, worried about a scratch on my forehead. I'm not most women, she replied, unconsciously leaning into his touch. No, he agreed softly. You're not. For a moment the air between them charged with possibility. Emma was acutely aware of his proximity, of the warmth of his hand against her skin, of the intensity in his dark eyes as they held hers. Then his phone buzzed, breaking the spell. Vittorio checked the message, his expression immediately shifting back to the controlled crime boss. I need to go. Stay in your room until I send someone for you. The villa is secure now, but I want all non-essential personnel keeping a low profile. After he left, Emma sank onto the edge of her bed, emotions churning within her. Fear at how close danger had come. Relief that both Vittorio and Antonio were safe. And something more complicated. A growing attachment to a man whose world operated by rules so different from her own that they should be irreconcilable. Hours later, a soft knock roused Emma from a fitful sleep. Antonio stood in the doorway, leaning heavily on his cane but insisting on visiting her himself. I needed to see that you were unharmed, he explained as she helped him to a chair. Last night was unfortunate. Vittorio told me about Marco, Emma said, studying the old man's face for his reaction. Pain flashed across Antonio's features. 27 years. He stood by my side through everything. The wars with the Genovese family, my wife's death, my daughter's illness. He shook his head slowly. I never suspected. Why would he betray you after all this time? Antonio's rheumy eyes met hers. Because of you, Cara. Emma stared at him, uncomprehending. Me? I never even met him before the meeting. Not you personally, Antonio clarified. What you represent. Change. the possibility of Vittorio choosing a different path. He sighed heavily. Marco was the architect of our family's traditional operations. He saw my son's interest in you as a threat to that legacy. Emma tried to process this information. But I'm just a catalyst, Antonio interrupted gently. Whether you recognize it or not, you've changed my son, made him question certain aspects of our world. Marco saw that as weakness. The Donatis exploited it. Before Emma could respond, Salvatore appeared in the doorway, his left arm in a sling, his expression grim. Signor Don, they found Donati. He's requesting a meeting. Antonio straightened, suddenly looking more like the powerful Don of years past than the ailing man of recent weeks. Where? Neutral ground, the old cathedral downtown. 1 hour. Antonio nodded decisively. Tell my son to prepare the car. Father, you can't seriously be considering... Vittorio appeared behind Salvatore, his face darkening with concern. It's not negotiable, Antonio cut him off. If Salvatore Donati wants to meet, we meet. This ends today. Emma watched the exchange with growing alarm. It's obviously a trap. All three men turned to her, seemingly having forgotten her presence. Antonio's expression softened. Perhaps. But sometimes the only way forward is through the fire. 40 minutes later, Emma stood in the villa's grand foyer, watching as Vittorio checked his weapon before concealing it beneath his impeccable suit jacket. Despite his protests, Antonio had insisted on attending the meeting, and where Antonio went, Vittorio would follow. This is madness, Emma said quietly as Vittorio approached her. You know they're planning something. Of course they are, he agreed, his voice calm despite the tension radiating from him. But so are we. Emma searched his face, finding not fear, but resolute determination. Be careful. Vittorio's hand rose to cup her cheek, his touch more intimate than it had any right to be given their short acquaintance. I will come back to you, Emma Pierce. That's a promise. As the Castellano convoy disappeared down the long driveway, Emma returned to the library where she had first been welcomed into Villa Castellano. The grand house felt eerily quiet, most of the security detail having accompanied the Dons to their meeting. She tried to distract herself with books, with television, with anything that might take her mind off the confrontation occurring downtown. Nothing worked. Her thoughts remained fixed on Vittorio, on his promise to return, on the undeniable connection growing between them despite every rational argument against it. The distant sound of helicopter rotors drew her to the window. A black chopper circled the estate once, then descended towards the helipad at the far end of the property. Emma watched, confusion turning to alarm as men in tactical gear poured from the aircraft. They weren't Castellano men. The Donati meeting had been exactly what she'd feared, a diversion. And she was now alone in a nearly empty villa as armed intruders breached the grounds. The morning light streamed through Villa Castellano's ornate windows as Emma awoke in unfamiliar surroundings. For a moment disorientation gripped her. The silk sheets and palatial dimensions of the guest room were stark reminders that she was far from her modest apartment. The previous night came rushing back. Vittorio's abrupt departure, his warning to remain at the estate, Antonio's cryptic comments about her newfound connection to their dangerous world. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. Miss Pierce, breakfast will be served in 30 minutes. Don Vittorio requests your presence. After the staff member departed, Emma investigated the closet, finding designer clothing in exactly her size, all with tags still attached. The invasion of privacy required to obtain her measurements was overshadowed by the staggering value of the wardrobe. She selected the simplest outfit, dark jeans and a cream cashmere sweater, and headed downstairs, navigating the mansion's labyrinthine corridors until she found the east terrace. Vittorio sat alone at a glass table laden with breakfast foods, reading something on a tablet that he set aside the moment she appeared. He wore a charcoal suit with a black open-collar shirt, looking immaculate. Only the faint shadows beneath his eyes hinted at a sleepless night. "Good morning," he said, rising briefly as she approached. "I trust you slept well?" "As well as could be expected," Emma replied, taking the seat across from him. "Where's Antonio?" "Still resting. His medication causes drowsiness." Vittorio poured her coffee from a silver pot. "He'll join us later." Emma accepted the coffee, but made no move toward the food. "Are you going to tell me what happened last night?" Vittorio's expression remained impassive, but something in his eyes hardened. The Donati family made their first significant move. 3 of their associates attempted to breach our territory. "And?" Emma prompted when he didn't continue. "They won't be making a second attempt," he replied, his voice devoid of emotion. Emma set down her cup. "Did you—" "You don't want the details," Vittorio interrupted. "Trust me on this." A tense silence fell between them. Emma studied him, trying to reconcile the cultured, articulate man sharing breakfast with her, and the implications of what had transpired. "Why am I still here?" she finally asked. "You said you'd have men watching me, not that I'd become a permanent house guest." Vittorio leaned back, regarding her thoughtfully. "The situation has escalated beyond what discreet surveillance can address. The Donati family knows about you now, not just as someone who served my father, but as someone under Castellano protection. And that makes me what? A target? A leverage point," he corrected. "They believe harming you would wound my father, and me." Emma's breath caught at the implication. "Would it?" Vittorio's gaze was unflinching. "Yes." The simple admission hung in the air between them, far more significant than its single syllable might suggest. "I need to call the hospital," she said, changing the subject. "My clinical rotation—" "Already handled," Vittorio interrupted. "Medical leave of absence, family emergency. Your professors were very understanding." Emma stared at him. "You spoke to my professors? Without my permission?" "My people did, with appropriate documentation." At her outraged expression, he added, "Your education won't suffer, Emma. When this is resolved, you'll return with accommodations to complete your requirements." "When what is resolved? This blood feud with the Donati family?" Emma shook her head in disbelief. "And how long will that take? Weeks? Months? Years?" Vittorio's jaw tightened. "Not years. Not even months if I have my way. The status quo has been disrupted. My father's return forced their hand. The situation will resolve itself one way or another very soon. And until then, I'm what? A prisoner here?" "A protected guest," Vittorio corrected, his tone softening slightly. "With full access to the estate, the grounds, whatever you require." "Accept my freedom," Emma replied sharply. Vittorio set down his cup with deliberate precision. "Would you prefer freedom with the constant risk of being taken by the Donati family?" "They wouldn't be gentle, Emma. They would use you to extract information, to leverage my father, to hurt our organization." The clinical way he laid out her potential fate sent a chill through Emma. "And what makes you think I have any information worth extracting?" "It doesn't matter what you know," Vittorio explained, his voice grim. "What matters is what they believe you know. What matters is that hurting you would hurt Antonio." He paused, his dark eyes holding hers. "And me." Before Emma could respond, the terrace doors opened and Antonio appeared, supported by his nurse. His complexion was ashen, his steps faltering, but his eyes lit up when he saw Emma. "There she is," he said, his voice stronger than his appearance suggested. "Still here, despite my son's terrible hospitality, I'm sure." Emma rose to help him to his seat, noticing how Vittorio watched the interaction with intense focus. "Your son has been a perfect gentleman," she assured Antonio, though her tone carried a hint of irony that wasn't lost on Vittorio. "Liar," Antonio chuckled, settling into his chair with a grimace. "But kind, as always." He looked between them. Have you two been discussing my treatment? Emma seized the opportunity to steer the conversation towards safer territory. The levodopa should help with the tremors, but there are side effects to watch for. Nausea, dizziness, sometimes visual hallucinations. I've already experienced hallucinations, Antonio quipped. I thought I saw my son smiling yesterday. Clearly impossible. Vittorio's expression remained serious, though a glint of amusement touched his eyes. Perhaps Emma brings out the best in me, father. The only thing that would bring out the best in you is the Donati family leaving Chicago permanently, Antonio replied, his light tone belying the weight of his words. Vittorio's phone vibrated. He glanced at the screen, his expression darkening. Excuse me, he said, rising. Some matters require immediate attention. After he strode from the terrace, Antonio leaned forward, lowering his voice. My son carries the weight of our entire family on his shoulders, has since he was 26 when I disappeared. Why did you leave? Emma asked, the question she'd been wondering since learning of their complicated history. Antonio's weathered hand trembled as he reached for his coffee cup. To protect him, though he wouldn't believe that. Some enemies can't be fought head-on, Emma. Sometimes the only way to defeat them is to give them what they think they want. Which was? Me removed from power. The Castellano Empire vulnerable under new leadership. A sad smile touched his lips. They underestimated my son. Within a year, he had consolidated power more effectively than I had in 2 decades. Emma absorbed this, trying to reconcile the clinical description of what must have been a bloody power consolidation with the man who had just poured her coffee with impeccable manners. But now you're back, she observed. Why? Antonio's eyes, briefly clear and sharp, met hers. Because the final phase requires my presence. The Donatis believe my return signals weakness in our family, division between father and son. He shook his head. Another miscalculation on their part. The final phase of what? Emma pressed. Eliminating a cancer that has plagued Chicago for generations, Antonio replied, then quickly added as Vittorio returned. But enough dark talk. Tell me about your nursing program. Later that afternoon, Emma's phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. She opened it reflexively, then nearly dropped the phone in shock. The image showed her apartment building, a red X spray-painted across her door. The message below it read, The Castellanos can't protect you forever, nurse. Antonio leaned over, his face darkening as he saw the screen. Vittorio! He called, his voice suddenly stronger, carrying across the grounds with surprising power. Vittorio was at their side within moments, flanked by security men. Without a word, Emma handed him her phone. His expression didn't change as he studied the image, but the temperature around him seemed to drop 10 degrees. Find out how they got this number, he ordered one of his men, and put a team at her building immediately. It's too late for that, Emma said quietly. They've already been there. They know where I live. Vittorio's eyes met hers, and for the first time, she saw raw fear in them, not for himself, but for her. You understand now, he said, not a question but a statement. Why you can't leave? Emma nodded slowly, the reality of her situation finally sinking in. Yes. Antonio squeezed her hand, his eyes filled with regret. I'm sorry, Cara. I never meant to bring this darkness into your life. It's not your fault, Emma assured him, though all three knew it wasn't entirely true. Vittorio handed her phone to one of his men. New device, new number, completely secure. He turned to his father. We need to accelerate the timeline. They're moving faster than we anticipated. Antonio nodded gravely. Then it's time to call the meeting. What meeting? Emma asked, looking between them. Vittorio's expression was grim but determined. The 5 families. It's time to end this, once and for all. That evening, Emma stood by her bedroom window, watching a procession of luxury cars pull up the driveway. Men in expensive suits emerged, each flanked by security, each greeted with formal respect by Vittorio's underboss, Salvatore. A knock sounded at her door. A young woman stood holding a garment bag. Don Castellano requests your presence at dinner. Inside the bag, Emma found an elegant black dress, conservative yet flattering, clearly expensive but not ostentatious. The message was clear. Vittorio wanted her present at this gathering, wanted her to make a specific impression. 20 minutes later, Emma descended the grand staircase to find Vittorio waiting at the bottom, resplendent in a black suit with subtle pinstripes. His eyes widened slightly as he took in her appearance. "You look beautiful," he said, his voice low enough that only she could hear. "You look like you're going to war," she replied. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Perception shapes reality. Tonight I need to project absolute strength." "And what am I projecting?" Emma asked as he offered his arm. Vittorio's dark eyes met hers. That the Castellano family protects its own. The implication sent a shiver through her as she placed her hand on his arm. "I'm not one of your family." "Aren't you?" he murmured, leading her toward the dining room. "You've broken bread with us, slept under our roof, been targeted by our enemies." His voice dropped even lower. "You've begun to care for a Castellano man, perhaps two of them." They entered the dining room where 5 men sat around an enormous table, each with advisors standing behind their chairs. Antonio occupied the head of the table, looking surprisingly strong and commanding despite his illness. A performance, Emma realized, for the benefit of the other families. All eyes turned to them as they entered. Emma felt the weight of their assessment. Curiosity, suspicion, in some cases, barely disguised disdain. "Gentlemen," Vittorio said, his voice carrying effortless authority, "may I present Emma Pierce, who is under the full protection of the Castellano family." As murmurs rippled around the table, Emma realized she had crossed a threshold from which there might be no return. In this moment, before the 5 ruling families of Chicago's underworld, Vittorio had declared her importance to him and his father, had effectively painted a larger target on her back while simultaneously wrapping her in the formidable armor of Castellano protection. Antonio's eyes met hers across the room, a mixture of approval and concern in his gaze. "Come, sit." Vittorio guided her to a chair between his and his father's, the position of highest honor and protection. The oldest of the visiting dons, a white-haired man with a face like weathered leather, leaned forward. "So this is the woman the Donatis are so interested in, the one they threatened directly." "The very same," Antonio confirmed, his voice stronger than Emma had heard in weeks. "A healer who showed kindness to an old man without knowledge of who he was. The Donatis would use such compassion against us." The tension in the room was palpable as silence stretched after Antonio's words. Emma felt the weight of evaluative gazes from every powerful man around the table. Vittorio remained impassive beside her, but she could feel the tension in his arm. "The Donatis have crossed a line," declared Vittorio, his voice calm but laden with authority. "Threatening an innocent civilian, a healthcare professional who simply showed kindness to an elderly man. This violates our code." A heavy-set man at the opposite end of the table let out a dry laugh. "Code? Since when do the Castellanos care about codes when it comes to expanding territory?" "Since always, Gianetti," replied Antonio, leaning forward. His eyes, though in an aged face, blazed with the same intensity Emma imagined he possessed decades ago. "The difference is that we understand the code evolves. The Donatis do not." A third man, younger than the other dons but with visible scars across his face, rapped his knuckles on the table. "I'm more interested in why Antonio Castellano has returned from the dead precisely when the Donatis began making moves on the western docks." Emma observed how Vittorio and Antonio exchanged a brief glance, a silent communication that seemed to confirm something between them. "Gentlemen," Vittorio began, gesturing for one of his men to bring forward a portfolio. "Let me show you why I've called this meeting." The contents of the portfolio were distributed: documents, photographs, transcripts of conversations. Emma glimpsed images of docks, warehouses, and faces she didn't recognize. But from the way the dons reacted, raised eyebrows, hardened stares, muttered Italian profanities, the impact was undeniable. The Donatis aren't merely competing for territory, explained Vittorio. They've established a partnership with the Sinaloa cartel to utilize our docks and distribution routes for something we all agreed to keep out of Chicago 3 generations ago. Heroin, muttered the oldest Don, his face pale. Worse, corrected Antonio, his voice more frail now but still carrying authority. Fentanyl, potent enough that a single shipment could devastate entire neighborhoods. Potent enough to kill children accidentally. Emma understood now. Despite all the criminal activities the families surely engaged in, there were lines they wouldn't cross. Self-imposed boundaries that defined their twisted version of honor. My disappearance, continued Antonio, was calculated. We knew the Donatis were infiltrating our organization. Instead of initiating an open war that would destroy all our families, I withdrew, allowing Vittorio to consolidate power while I worked in the shadows, tracing the Donatis' connection to its source. The scarred man crossed his arms. And how does the nurse fit into all this? Emma felt Vittorio stiffen beside her. Coincidence, answered Antonio before Vittorio could speak, but a blessed one. Miss Pierce had no idea who I was when she began helping me at the restaurant. Her genuine compassion. He paused, searching for the right words. Reminded me why we do what we do, why we protect our communities, our families. The Donatis threatened her because they realized she held importance to me, added Vittorio. When they discovered who my father was visiting regularly, they incorrectly assumed she was our informant. At that moment, the dining room doors burst open. Salvatore rushed in, face tense. Don Castellano, we have a situation. Donati cars have been spotted approaching from the east and west gates. The Dons rose immediately, bodyguards moving to defensive positions. It's a direct violation, growled Gianetti, attacking during a meeting of the 5 families. Vittorio remained surprisingly calm. He turned to Emma, taking her hands in his. Do you trust me? She hesitated only for a second before nodding. Yes. Good, he smiled slightly, turning to the other Dons. Gentlemen, it appears Carlo Donati has decided to spare us the trouble of summoning him. Salvatore, execute the Vesuvius protocol. Emma watched the instant transformation of the mansion. Panels slid open, revealing weaponry. Men moved with military efficiency to strategic positions, and Antonio was quickly escorted by 2 men. Emma comes with me, instructed Vittorio, guiding her from the dining room through a corridor she hadn't noticed before. This was always the end game, Father, he said to Antonio, who walked with difficulty ahead of them. Antonio's cunning old smile returned. Not exactly as we planned, but perhaps better. Now we have witnesses from all 5 families. They reached a reinforced security room with monitors showing every angle of the property. Emma watched, horrified and fascinated, as black cars breached the gates, armed men emerging. Don't worry, Vittorio said softly. No one will die today who doesn't deserve to die. A figure emerged from the central car, a middle-aged man with immaculately groomed silver hair wearing a navy blue suit. Carlo Donati, murmured Antonio, studying the monitor. Always so arrogant, and always so predictable, added Vittorio. He pressed a button on a console. Welcome to Castellano property, Don Donati. Your weapons won't be necessary. On the monitor, Carlo looked around, searching for the source of the voice. Come out, Castellano. Let's finish this once and for all. With pleasure, Vittorio replied through the system. But first, allow me to show you and your men what we've uncovered. On the external monitors, large screens descended from trees and facades, displaying the same evidence that had been presented to the Dons, but now with additions. Photographs of Carlo Donati meeting with cartel members, transcripts of conversations about drug routes, and, most devastating, images of laboratories where children worked processing chemicals. "What is this?" Emma asked, horrified. "The reason the Donatis need to be eradicated," replied Antonio, his voice weak but filled with hatred. "They're not just bringing deadly drugs to our streets, they're using child labor to process them." Outside, Emma saw the other Dons emerging from the mansion, all watching the screens with hardened expressions. Even Donati's men looked disturbed, some lowering their weapons, glancing at their boss with newfound distrust. "Now, Carlo," Vittorio's voice resonated through the external speakers, "you have two options. Surrender to the judgment of the 5 families, or—" He didn't need to complete the threat. Carlo, seeing himself abandoned even by his own men in the face of irrefutable evidence, drew a pistol. But before he could aim it, 5 simultaneous shots struck him, not from Castellano's men, but from representatives of each of the other families. Emma gasped, turning away from the screen. Vittorio gently held her face between his hands. "It's over," he said softly. "One life taken, but thousands saved. Children who will never have to work in those conditions. Families who will never lose loved ones to those drugs." Antonio approached, looking genuinely frail now that the need to appear strong had passed. "Emma," he said, taking one of her hands, "when I met you at the restaurant, I had no idea what role you would play. But now I understand it wasn't coincidence. Some might call it fate." Outside, Vittorio's men were already taking control of the situation, disarming the remaining Donati men while the other Dons gathered, apparently discussing the redistribution of Donati territory. 3 days later, Emma sat on the terrace beside Antonio, watching the sunrise. His tremors had worsened, the stress of recent days taking its toll. "What happens now?" she asked, adjusting the blanket over his knees. "Now," replied Antonio, "Vittorio's real work begins, cleaning up the Donati organization, ensuring the families remain united in their commitment against hard drugs." "And what about me?" Emma asked, the question she had been avoiding. "That depends entirely on you," answered Vittorio, appearing on the terrace with 3 cups of coffee. He handed one to Emma, their fingers briefly touching. "You can return to your life. New apartment, of course. Discreet security until everything settles. Finish your nursing studies. Never see us again, if you prefer." Emma observed the 2 men, the broken elderly man whose eyes still shone with shrewd intelligence, and the younger one, whose power was evident in every controlled movement, but who now looked at her with undeniable vulnerability. "And the other option?" she asked, though she already knew the answer. A subtle smile touched Vittorio's lips. "The Castellano family has always needed a good nurse." "And a compassionate heart," added Antonio, his eyes crinkling with a smile, "to balance our harsher instincts." Emma took a sip of her coffee, considering. She had seen the worst of this world in the past few weeks, violence, power, manipulation. But she had also witnessed loyalty, protection, and strangely, a distorted form of justice. "Nursing school starts in 2 weeks, she said finally. "I intend to graduate with honors." Vittorio nodded, respecting her non-answer. "And," she continued, looking directly into his eyes, "Antonio will need ongoing care for his advanced Parkinson's. Someone who knows his condition and his history." The relief on Antonio's face was evident, but it was Vittorio's expression that caught her attention, a combination of surprise, gratitude, and something deeper that she wasn't yet ready to name. "The Castellanos protect their family," he said softly. Emma nodded, watching the sunrise illuminate the grounds of the estate. "And family takes care of its own."